Welcome back to Canyon Tune, and as you can tell by the video title, I ended up going with a standalone on the Supercharged E36. I was running into some serious problems with the stock DME, and I didn't really like how it handled a lot of like safety related things like knock and fuel pressure, stuff like that. I just didn't feel comfortable driving the car hard without any kind of like safety features built in. So yes, I did make a lot of tuning videos covering how to tune a car with a turbo or supercharger on the stock DME. Works all great and fine. I was running into some drivability issues as well, but I ended up going with a VEMS plug-and-play M52 S52 standalone ECU, and has some really cool features. A lot of people say they're outdated. Yes, most of the development was done in probably like 2005 to 2012 area, so not the most new tech in the world, but it gets the job done. It's got all the basics. It runs on speed density, some really cool features like motorsport features I'll get into later in this video, but in this video we're going to actually go ahead and rip out the stock DME and install the new standalone and then see how it goes. So maybe you guys can add some comments to this video, but some of the main problems I was having with the stock DME trying to tune it was the MAF scaling. I was running a Nissan MAF and I really just could not get the scaling dialed in. So it's a 0 to 5 volt reference and it just didn't seem very linear. And once you started getting past like 4 volts, all of the high load cells were within like 0.1 or 2, or actually 0.001 volts of each other. And it just didn't really seem safe to dial in how much air is coming into the motor based on such a small voltage discrepancy. Now, voltages, I mean, stock they have voltage regulator, but I just don't trust that little variance in how much fuel I need to add based on a certain amount of airflow. So just didn't seem practical to be doing that. I did use like a 4K resistor on it and it was still maxing out the MAF. So as you add resistor to your mass airflow sensor to try and stay within the limits of the MAF, you lose resolution. So that was not a good thing. The other thing was I could not for the life of me control open loop enrichment properly. So on the stock DME, it's TPS based and not load based. So whenever I would switch into open loop to make sure that it wasn't compensating with the narrowband O2 sensors, I couldn't get that switch point dialed in, and that was a safety related thing, that I couldn't get that fuel to go down into the low 11 AFRs where I needed it to be rich. The ECU was just kind of fighting me the whole time. So maybe there's something you can do to make the switch point a little bit better. In the MS41.3 custom code that's coming out, has load-based switching for open loop enrichment, but I just did not like how that was handled on the stock DME at all. My car particularly, I do like taking this thing on road trips. So one thing I was kind of worried about was if I lose a intake pipe, or one of the couplers blows off or blows up, or I have any kind of boost leak whatsoever, I'm screwed. Because it's a MAF-based system, you're gonna see all this air coming in through the airflow meter, and then it all gets lost somewhere in between that and in the engine, and it's not gonna run right at all, or just be stranded somewhere. So if I lost a supercharger belt somewhere, or blew off a coupler, be pretty screwed. With the new ECU, it's all speed density based, and it's all based on manifold pressure. So even if I do lose some sort of, have some catastrophic boost leak or something, it's still gonna get me home. I really like that on the new setup, speed density, I could have an open blow-off valve. Sounds cooler, but that's not the main reason I went with the standalone. And the new one has a lot of safety features built in, which is nice. It has limits to, if you're dropping fuel pressure, it can compensate for that a little bit. It can dial back timing in a bunch of scenarios, coolant temp, air charge temp, exhaust temp. I think it has, yeah, exhaust temp sensor on it. So there's a lot of stuff you can tune in safety wise to make sure the car is safe and doesn't blow up. I'd rather spend a little bit more money on a standalone than have to rebuild my entire engine because something in the stock DME wasn't working properly and didn't have any kind of safety and just kind of went off and did its own thing. With these Rotrax superchargers, if you bounce off the rev limiter with a stock setup, it has a tendency to break the actual compressor shaft. So there's the compressor wheel on the supercharger, there's a little shaft that comes through. They like to break off if you bounce off hard rev limiter all the time, because it's just a jarring force on the belt system that kind of just goes back and forth when you're bouncing off limiter, and it likes to break the shaft on the supercharger itself. So with the new setup, I can change all kind of parameters to when I'm coming into redline, I can make it nice and soft and transitional and not have to worry about a hard rev limiter on the stock DME and not be able to have control over it. So I think that's pretty much it. Let me show you now what I have with the new VEMS plug-and-play system, everything that came with it, and show you what everything is for and kind of the game plan. I'll put a link in the description to where I got this ECU from. I actually got this secondhand, so it was a little bit cheaper, but you can still buy these brand new, which is nice. They do have the stock DME connector, so there shouldn't be anything that you have to change. You just plug your stock harness right into this and you should be good to go. All of these flying leads off the back do various things. So you have your USB connection, which goes from serial to USB, and then you've got connections for, this is an expansion plug, so you can have various additional inputs and outputs. A lot of people put methanol sensors on these. I might be doing that eventually. I believe this one is for the wideband connection. Or actually, no, this one is a wideband connection. So this plugs right into your wideband O2 sensor. It has a wideband controller built into the module itself. And then we've got a flying lead, which is actually a pin for the standard BMW air intake connector. This is a GM version of the air intake temp sensor. And this is going to react a lot faster than the BMW one, and this is a necessary component to running speed density. So speed density, you want pretty much a couple things to factor all that in for fueling. You're going to want your wideband reading, you're going to want a good intake air temp reading, and you want your map sensor reading. So this is an external map sensor, 4-bar it comes with. So yeah, one of these plugs right into there. You run your pressure line to there, pressure reference from your manifold, and then you should be good to go. So this should be pretty straightforward to install, and then this just goes into the DME compartment, and then you should be good to rock and roll. And then I'm going to actually be showing the tuning aspects. I might do that in a second video. This one's too long, but I will just figure it out. I'll show you guys what it takes to install this. I think the first thing I'm going to tackle is getting this GM air intake temp sensor plugged into some of the piping that I have. Luckily, I have a nice flat piece, but you can order weld-in bungs for these. These are fairly standard sensors with most standalones. They use these same things, so you can get a little weld-in bung, put it on your charge pipe, and then this would screw right into that. But luckily I got a nice flat piece going into the intake, and I can drill and tap that and put that in there. But yeah, pretty straightforward install, and let's get to it. Okay, so yeah, right here, this pipe, I got a nice flat surface on here to work with, so I'm actually gonna drill and tap right there for my reference, and then just change the plug over. The other thing I have to do is, they say you have to unplug the stock cam position sensor. I have another cam position sensor, I think it's a Hall effect sensor, that's gonna plug into there. It's off an ODB1 car, and that should work well with the standalone setup. And that way it can actually control your variable valve timing VANOS with the new ECU. Just using a step bit here, and I made a little mark on here so I don't go too deep and then make the hole too big. That's actually a really good spot for that intake air temp, because that's literally right before the throttle body, and you want a very accurate temp reading right before it goes into the engine. So you don't want your sensor positioned super far away, because I mean, you can get a lot hotter or colder temperature variance between when it comes out of your turbo or supercharger into your motor. So it's better to get a reference on there. A lot of guys will put it right in the manifold, but I think it's a good spot for it. And I can't drill in and tap into my plastic manifold on a S52, so this will work. All right, so we got our GM air intake temp sensor wired up real nice. And I had to actually disconnect the this piece here to get underneath there to unplug it at the stock location so I can run this pigtail here, but ended up working out pretty good. Okay, so now we're gonna work on taking out the stock DME. So I'm gonna undo that little piece there, and then stock DME should slide out, and then I'm gonna plug the new one in. Is pretty nasty inside that compartment. I'm gonna have to vacuum that out. It's not a good thing that there's a lot of time these seals leak right here, and you can actually get water in your DME compartment, and that's pretty bad. So I'm gonna have to figure out how to seal that up. All right, so stock ECU is out. You guys going in. All right, this looks like an absolute disaster area, but I want to just double check that I can connect to the ECU, and that'll possibly start up if I enter some basic parameters. I'll end up tucking this stuff in nicely, and then I have a vacuum line running over the top of the engine because I don't have any hoses long enough right this second to reach this map sensor. So, just gonna send it. So I need to hook up my laptop and then see if I can connect, and we're gonna type in the injector settings and a couple other basic parameters and see if she starts up on the new ECU. All right, we are all connected. I'm gonna type in some base configuration settings, but it's actually reading the lambda value and then my battery voltage. It's saying it's super lean right now, obviously, because the car's off. I'm gonna go through and make sure that every sensor is reading the correct ambient values or off values. I need to calibrate the TPS, but it's fairly standard steps for setting up any standalone ECU. This is just what you have to go through. So I'm gonna go through all this and I'll get back with you guys. All right, so I got some of the basic settings dialed in. It's kind of weird. The ECU shipped with a strange crank and cam wheel configuration, so I'm hoping that's correct. When I actually load it into the VEMS Tune software, it says that the configuration is invalid. So hopefully it's fine and they entered the information correctly. But yeah. I also went to try and crank it for the first time and my battery was dead. So I really hope this new ECU isn't a power drain for whatever reason. That would be really bad. But yeah, just letting this thing charge now and then I can try to crank it for the first time. Okay, of course I got this off camera, but I finally got it running, and the issue was if I go into the base setup under the where you set up the trigger wheel settings, so where there's a missing tooth in the crank, where it gives the crank signal, all those settings were wrong, and this is supposed to be a plug and play for M52, so I don't know what those settings were for, but yeah, I wasn't getting any RPM signal, and I was getting crank sync issues, so that was a telltale sign that those settings were wrong or some issue there. But it actually fired right up, surprisingly, and it was running pretty good. I got the injectors scaled properly. I just need to figure out this mess right here. But yeah, it's getting there. Alright, I wanted to show an actual startup here. Got my laptop. Should fire right up. Alright, there we go. Boom! I don't know why the idle is so high, it's kind of weird. Maybe it's just the warm-up. Let's see if it goes back down. RPM signal's working, especially on the dash here, because the output has to come from the ECU into the cluster, so that all works. Idle's coming down a little bit. Okay, so we have our Lambda Correction here. So this is where it's at, and this is where the target is. So you can see it's trying to do some correction there. It's running very, very rich. Let's look at our V. Alright, you can see our V's down in this area, and then when you rev it, that definitely needs some tuning. But you can see Lambda target, and you can kind of keep an eye on the correction and all that, so that's kind of cool. We got our ignition table here, and then you can set actual Lambda targets, which is nice. So this is your air fuel ratio. So 1 is 14.7, and this is going rich. Really curious to see what this auto-tune feature is like. I played around with it a little bit in other ECUs, but I believe it's live V analysis. Alright, so I can come in here and set some parameters. Filter failed. Let's see. Yeah, I'm gonna have to play around with this a little bit. So yeah, I'm really happy with how that turned out, actually. Got it running, and I actually figured out the auto-tune issue is because it wasn't up to operating temperature. So 70 degrees Celsius, it started to auto-tune itself. I think I'm gonna start, wrapping up the wires. I need to get some longer vacuum lines for some of those, and I gotta run a new vacuum line to the blow-off valve. But I think I'm gonna do another episode tomorrow where I'm actually road tuning this, and I'll show you guys how it goes. It already runs 1,000 times better than the stock ECU, and I haven't even really messed with it yet, so that's a plus. Yeah, thanks for coming along, and I know there isn't really a lot of information on the VEMS ECUs on E36s, especially S52s. I've never seen one on an S52, so should be pretty interesting. And then I'm going to start messing with some of the more advanced settings, get some anti-lag going, some pops and bangs, some flames, all the cool stuff, launch control, and then maybe run some E85 eventually with a flex fuel sensor. But yeah, this is the start of a really interesting endeavor here, and glad you guys came along for the ride. Thanks for tuning in.